Last time we explored Astara, we were looking at our fossil revival station and/or safari zone, our combination fossil and safari zone. But our next location in Astara is a bit of a harsh and rugged one, being the mountains to the bottom right of the map. These are the Blue Steel Mountains, named after the Blue Mountains, which is a beautiful area in Australia here. The mountains here are tall and difficult to climb unless you're willing to walk the rickety bridges and dangerous caves and cliffs throughout the mountains. This area would be almost like the islands in Zelda, Tingle Island and the like, where there are bridges and strong winds all connecting this range together. Although instead of there being water below the channels, between the mountains would contain some of the stranger Pokemon such as Strong Encounters and the Beast Paradox Pokemon looking for their next meal. Of course, we have the Rotobike at this point, so it's a little bit easier. In this region, there's also a Beast Titan, but we'll cover them later, as well as a new town and gym leader that sits just behind the Blue Steel Mountains. But we are here right now to meet some Pokemon who call this unique mountain range home. First, let's cover a more unique Pokemon. This line of Pokemon is based on the legend of the Three Sisters, a mountain range in Echo Point, Katoomba. The Aboriginal legend tells of three sisters with actually two different stories, but in the end they were irreversibly turned to stone. It's a cool looking place and an amazing legend. I wanted to be respectful of the legend while introducing my own spin on it by having these two Pokemon be the source of similar tales in Astara. The first form, Blokiii, actually came second as I wanted it to be part of the second form, sort of like the Magnemite line. I settled on it being the hand of the second form, each of the three spirits inhabiting the one cube. The fingers actually looking a bit like cute little bunny ears. I don't have many mons that are just things in the decks yet, so I think this fills a good niche. Blokiii is simple and effective and would probably move about similar to how Knackley does, just sort of wobbling about. Blokiii, the mystery Pokemon, a rock type. Scientists have spent a long time trying to understand the origins of Blokiii. It seems that Blokiii are fond of living together in groups of three, however this is also unknown why. Ancient Astarans say that Blokiii were formed from three sisters who fought against Pokemon who would attack their village each night. When they finally passed in battle, their souls came together to form Blokiii. The eyes of Blokiii seem to be able to detect the presence of Pokemon that are hostile in nature, and the top two horns on Blokiii will point in the direction of it no matter how far away. Blokiii has a new ability called Chipped Body, which when hit by a physical move, this Pokemon lays Stealth Rock on the field. At first, Sistrii were just three humanoidish shapes that sat upon a clump of dirt. It was okay, but it didn't really feel very interesting or fun. At least the lower half didn't. I liked what the top half had going for it. This was before I decided on Blokiii being a thing. At first this line was going to be either Rock Ghost or Rock Psychic, but I have two other lines that filled this niche with Stalspar for the Rock Ghost and a line you'll meet later for Rock Psychic. And with a lack of single types in Astara, I thought the pure Rock type would actually benefit this line. Just because it has some strange energy doesn't mean it needs a second typing. I instead started to work on the idea of it being more statue or golem shaped, able to walk around a little better than the original idea. And with the moss, I feel like this gives off some really nice ancient protector vibes to connect the ancient Astarans. Sistrii would probably fill a similar role to Glamora in being a setup Pokemon for Stealth Rock. Sistrii, the mystery Pokemon, a rock type. Once three Blokiii come together in perfect sync, they evolve to become Sistrii, which seems to be an ancient Astaran protector and may prove the story of the three sisters partially true. It doesn't move much, instead standing still till a Pokemon gets close enough, which it will then blast them with psychic energy or use their strange floating hands to throw the Pokemon away. Due to its nature, moss and other vegetation grows upon Sistrii, as well as certain Pokemon like Raswell and Magugu coming to perch and live around Sistrii. This doesn't bother Sistrii at all, they seem to actually be quite happy to harbour them. Sistrii has the ability Chipped Body and Third Eye. Third Eye is an ability that I created that Increases the power of psychic type moves, similar to Steelworker. The evolution method for Blokiii, I think, would be bringing multiple Blokiii to a statue of Sistrii, where they would sort of activate it and become your team member. Maybe even Sistrii statues being found all around Astara. But I'll work on that, and when we're done with Astara, during the Pokedex video, I'll have the Evo methods for all the Pokemon there. Next up we have a little cutie line. Originally this Pokemon was meant for the city, but it didn't feel like it fit there. This is based on the Sugar Glider, which I think has quickly become one of my favourite animals. They're cute little possum-like creatures who can glide, and you can see them just being yeeted up in the air on TikTok. Just a bit too much for my liking. The Pokemon idea here was something a bit like the Swirlix line, a sugar-based Sugar Glider. I actually went through a multitude of sketches here. I didn't know exactly what I wanted, with most of them starting out looking like some kind of 3D PS2 action platformer mascot, but I wanted it to have a little less cartoony personality and more animalistic in the first form. I gave it much more basic eyes and the big fluffy cotton candy tail. It's a simple enough design, but I'd say it's rather effective. Marshugy, the Sugar Glider Pokemon, a fairy and flying type. Incredibly common around Astara is the sweet Marshugy, usually found clinging to trees or larger Pokemon. Marshugy use their large flaps of skin between their limbs to glide between two high places. Due to being quite unskilled at flying, Marshugy can use their tails to cushion their falls, working like an airbag, or if in a combat situation, a shield against physical attacks. Marshugy love sweet substances and will flock to trees dripping sweet sap, although this leads to them getting sticky and needing other Marshugy to help clean their coat. Marshugy's abilities are Levitate and Wind Rider. Once it evolves, Parashug is much sassier and is kind of modelled after a sort of Daredevil cross fashionista design, a bit how Minccino becomes Cinccino. I really wanted to show off the idea that this thing's main gimmick is that massive cloud-like tail that can puff up and use as an actual parachute in its sweet heists. The markings around its head work as sort of those old-timey aviator helmets they wore, and with the eyes looking like the goggles. There's many different inspirations toward it as well, as kind of looking like a grandma holding their cardigan during a cold day, about to ask about every question imaginable.
Oh, my beautiful grandson!
Grandma!
Parashug, the Sugar Glider Pokemon, a fairy and flying type. Parashug are daring sugar thieves, going to great lengths to swoop into people's homes to steal sugary foods and drinks. It is now an adept and speedy flyer and can fly through small gaps by quickly squeezing itself up. By using sticky sap, they coat their tail smooth and flat. They can then, if needed, inflate it to create an incredibly effective parachute, allowing them to glide straight down instead of gliding mostly horizontally. Parashug are quite haughty and will treat anyone it deems lesser with disdain. Sometimes it just does this to get a reaction from its target long enough to lower their guard. Parashug's abilities are Levitate and Wind Rider. So if you haven't noticed, Astara doesn't really have any sport-related mons, mainly because I'm not a sportsman. My exercise is walking and lifting, but I still wanted to represent sport in some way or another. And what better way to do that than the slightest nod towards sports spectators, as well as a good old-fashioned Pogan. Based off the mountain brushtail possum, Pogan is a dopey-looking possum bogan. He's a little too lost in the sauce, or berry juice in this case. It has slight vibes of Australian Prime Minister John Howard, or just in general the kind of person you'd see at a sporting event, one VB in hand and just the biggest red nose from drinking you've ever seen. I ended up adding a beanie with a fluffy pom-pom to it, as that's sort of the image I get in my mind of these guys up early at a game with their sport-coloured beanie on. For actual colours I chose white and a sort of light brown to keep it very mountainous feeling. This would be a later game normal type, but its Evo has some decent stats and abilities, so that's why. He has that sort of Feebas feeling to it before going a bit Milotica, in this case I guess Kaiju Nidoking. Pogan, the possum Pokemon, a normal type. Pogan are brutish Pokemon who live up in the mountains or in the roofs of houses. There is no in between. Everything annoys Pogan, even other Pogans, so they usually live alone. It will make horrid grunting noises if something gets too close, and if needed it will use its sharp claws or large tail to smack enemies. Pogan find tree hollows and ferment berries in them to make a juice similar to the kind that Shuckle creates. This is stronger due to them mixing in Trebirth leaves, which creates an intoxicating brew that only Pogan in its evolution can truly handle. Pogan's ability is Unaware. The goal with Rugbyst was to make a Pokemon harkening back to that sort of Nidoking Kaiju build that they had going. It also is very much how I imagine a possum looking if I had only ever seen the sounds they make. I kept a lot of the general parts of Pogan like the tail and eyebrows, but gave it a bit more aggressive and confident look to it, and then gave it that Nidoking or Queen hands that don't look great for picking up. They'd have trouble like a claw machine, but instead much better for walloping people. At this point I don't think Rugbyst would be climbing trees, just mountains instead. It has the normal rock type, which is an interesting type, but would fall prey to fighting types. However, to make up for that, it has Fluffy and a decent defense stat, so it can at least be a bit of a threat, especially with its own signature move. Rugbyst, the aggressive Pokemon, a normal and rock type. Rugbyst will use their sheer bulk to bully any Pokemon that stands in its way. Or doesn't, it isn't picky. The tree where its berry juice ferments is so highly coveted that it will spend days on end keeping it protected. Rugbyst hands have adapted for climbing up rugged mountain surfaces, but also for punching, allowing it to close up its hand to create a powerful bludgeon that can easily break stone. Rugbyst and Pogan will sometimes congregate to drink shared berry juices and watch battles against trainers and Pokemon, and seem to even bet their stocks of berry juice on the winner. Rugbyst's abilities is Unaware and Fluffy. Rugbyst gets a new signature move called Skull Shatter, a 160 base power physical rock type move with 90 accuracy and 5 PP. The move however has a caveat. The user collects earth around their fists at the beginning of their turn then strikes last always. If the user is hit by a move before attacking, the damage is only 40 base power but lowers the enemy's defense and speed by 1 stage. A powerful move that you can choose to either do destructive damage or chip at an aggressive opponent's stats. But with only 5 PP, you have to choose wisely. Rugbyst don't care though, they're just here to slam. The next Pokemon is a single Pokemon with 2 forms, a bit like Cybus, from the City video. These Pokemon are based off of both gum trees and bushfires. Australia has a lot of bushfires, which sadly are catastrophic to both the fauna and flora, but the gum trees build different. Apart from cracked out koalas having a nosh on them despite them being toxic, gum trees ignite easier than other trees, which is surprising in themselves. So they're sort of a catalyst for bushfires, but more so than that, they also regrow quite quickly after bushfires. So a sort of rebirth-based cycle Pokemon was in order. We're going to cover the on fire form first, so it was the original form I did. This would be a grass fire type and is essentially almost a treant-like creature with a canopy of its head, replaced with simply a massive fireball. It's got swirly, confused, joyous look due to the toxins of the gum tree, and it's a very Spinda-if tree design, wobbling about in the mountains here. Colours it has that charcoal burnt wood colour. I always relish the times when a Pokemon I do has like special effects like fire. It's always fun to give some special effects to a Pokemon. This form would be only temporary, however, as fire is always burn out eventually. Trebirth, the bushfire Pokemon, a fire and grass type, the wildfire form. When a Trebirth tries to protect its forest from a bushfire or during a battle against a fire type, this phenomenon can occur, transforming Trebirth from a protector to a frenzied attacker. Its body releases toxic smoke that even one huff can cause extreme hallucinations. This smoke is also affecting Trebirth itself, which causes it to have strange and jerky movements. After a while, the fire on this form of Trebirth dies down and it will slowly reform back into its rebirth form, although a good splashing of water can speed up this process. Trebirth has a new ability called Inflamed, where this Pokemon will change forms in 3 turns or when hit by a water type move. Physical contact with this Pokemon will burn the enemy. For the rebirth form, I wanted a similar feeling to Arboliva, a feminine, almost Gaia god-looking creature that was emerging from the on-fire form of Trebirth, like a new growth sprouting out from it, also making an almost dress look to the bottom half. There was a big problem with the design I noticed as I got halfway through though, in that its eyes hidden was cool and all, but it made the mouth look like this eerie eye instead of a head. I couldn't have that. I wanted this Pokemon to be serene and calm compared to the other form that's wacky and unsettling in a way. So to try and rectify this, I gave some very simple eyes for Trebirth that gave it a sort of almost mythological statue look to it. I'm really happy with how this turned out, and I could see it being camouflaged in the trees of the mountains to give you a bit of a startle as an encounter. Trebirth, the bushfire Pokemon, a grass type. Rebirth form. Trebirth are usually found all around Astaris Forest, but after the destruction of the trees lining the Blue Steel Mountains, Trebirth has started showing up there more than ever. A kind and caring Pokemon, it harbours any Pokemon that wants to live in its bowels, although the leaves upon its body are actually quite toxic to Pokemon. These same toxic leaves are a massive catalyst for bushfires. If even a single spark falls on Trebirth, it becomes its bushfire form. It will, after some time, return to this form, however. Trebirth has a new ability called Flame Cloak. This Pokemon will change forms after using or being hit by a Fire-type move. Fire-type moves aren't as effective to this Pokemon. Let's talk about 2 Beast Paradox forms now, both plant-related but reversed in a way. Trebirth is our first to get a Beast Paradox form. My idea was that a group of on-fire Trebirth with no way to put out the fire being in an especially heated zone of ultra space started to just fall apart. But after a while, and thanks to the radiation, they found energy and a new form together. I wanted it to look like hooded figures standing together as well as the leftover burning forest that you'd see after a bushfire, still constantly smouldering after the tragedy. At first it felt a bit trevenant, but with the smoke coming off it started to take on its own personality. Because they're all connected now, the mouths in certain perspectives all connect together and would make this horrifying burning mouth. The colours are very similar to regular Trebirth because it is still that form, just fused, but I added in the openings to the body being on fire and it really gives it that perfect eerie vibe of them just watching you. This is one of those Pokemon that would probably not be a fan favourite by no means, but the scare factor would make it memorable. Trebirth, Beast Paradox form, the Coven Pokemon, a Dark and Fire type. With no real way to return to its regular form, Trebirth began to crumble and had to combine itself with other Trebirth to survive in ultra space. After some time, their bodies solidified and became strong enough to stay together. The smoke that comes from its now constantly smouldering body is so toxic, can prove fatal from even one breath. While the Beast Paradox crisis continues, we urge anyone to stay away from bushfires and burning trees unless you're a firefighting professional. 5-star threat. Trebirth has a new ability in this form called Toxic Smoke, where when sent out this Pokemon sets up a toxic cloud for a few turns that have a chance to inflict toxic on every Pokemon each turn, both enemy and ally. Our final Beast Paradox and Pokemon of the video is a Paldeanmon that I fell in love with, especially because I randomly found it shiny. It's Farigiraf. What an amazing design, but I really wanted to get super weird with it. Based off some unique mountain flowers, Farigiraf becomes almost a host to weird plant life that takes over, and although still acting like the second head covering, it's pretty much become all there is, with the center head being all confused and weird looking. I wanted it to look like a man-eating plant sort of deal, and very alien with various species of plants coming into the design of this Beast Paradox. Each of the eyes are meant to emulate the second Chain Chomp head, as well as the flowers having some spiky teeth. I just really wanted this to look as weird and off-putting as possible while still looking like Farigiraf. For typing I chose normal grass, which I'm sure is a weird decision, but it's trying to be a plant, a normal plant. Yeah, the typing's a bit of a pun, I guess. This form is scarier than it is dangerous, much rather trying to blend in than actually fight you. Farigiraf, Beast Paradox form, the Trap Pokemon, a normal and grass type. It seems the armoured tail of Farigiraf took on a form in Ultra Space that instead of protecting Farigiraf, camouflaged it, taking on the strange appearance of the warped plant life there. Farigiraf itself has seemed to lose some of its actual brain power in the main head, but this is all transferred to the second overlapping head, allowing it to focus all brain power on appearing as a plant in its local environment. This form is actually quite passive unless you're a smaller Pokemon, 1 star threat. This form of Farigiraf has a new ability called Jaw Trap, where this Pokemon's physical attacks have a chance to trap an opponent from switching out. And that's all I have for today's video. Obviously the Blue Steel Mountains would have plenty of other Astarid staples found around it, the likes of Valkyrie and its pre-evo, which we'll meet in a later video, Codalite and Jetzacodal, as well as Cargoon and Scrome, plenty of steel types, perfect for the Blue Steel Mountains. So what did you think of the video? Comment down below if any of the Pokemon here are going on your team and your thoughts on them. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, it helps a lot. In the next video I went a little ham designing a whole bunch of designs for a hypothetical Paradox Black and White game. With all the rumours swirling about, I'll show those designs and talk a bit about what I think could happen. But till then, stay safe and thanks so much for watching. See you next time.